Well, I'm going to get started. So I'd like to open once again just by reading Genesis chapter 1, as I did last week. I think you never read Scripture enough, and so I think it's good to read it again to remind us of what we're talking about tonight. So Genesis chapter 1, again, this is NAS, this is New American Standard. There are other versions, but this is the version that I use most. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. Then God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day. Then God said, "Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit, trees of the earth bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a third day. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons for the days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. Then God said, "Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens." God created the great sea monsters, and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." There was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after their kind." And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." Then God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth which has life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. By the seventh day God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all the work which God had created and made. So tonight, I'll open with a word of prayer in a minute, but tonight we're going to talk about a variety, about 10 or so ways of interpreting Genesis 1 and 2. And I think it's important to note that these are all Christian views. That is, Christian thinkers have thought of all these 10 ways, and there's even more than these 10. But I want to say that Christians, I don't think we don't all agree on the how, and maybe we don't need to, but we do all agree on the who, on who created, and that's what we need to agree on. So that's where we're headed. Let me open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the truth that it teaches us. We thank you that you've given it to us to read and to think about and to learn from. I pray that you will teach us now your truth and teach us the way we should think about Genesis 1 and 2, about how you've created things and who you are in that creation. I pray that will just ring anew in our ears, that you are the creator of everything that exists. Pray that we'll see how gloriously and wondrously you've created things, and that will be the primary thing. So we ask that you'll guide our hearts now in this time. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So the EPC has a motto, right? Anybody know the motto, the three sayings in the EPC? Okay.
Agree on the essentials, but
yeah, so on the essentials, unity. Yeah, on the essentials, unity. On the non-essentials, liberty. But in all things, charity. And so in the essentials, that is the saving knowledge that we need to be Christians, those essentials, we have unity. In the non-essentials, liberty. And as far as I know, in the EPC, there is no essential view or agreement on Genesis 1 and 2 and how to interpret it. So we have some liberty here. And so you'll see the liberty, the range, and there's a website, that's the Gospel Coalition, and there's I looked it up. There's Vern Poythress, who's a biblical scholar. I believe that's right. He's Presbyterian, I believe. I'm right about that. I think he was one of the co-authors of one of the three views or something. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, I think he's Presbyterian, Reformed anyway. He has this article called Evangelical Interpretations of Genesis 1 and 2. So, and it lists 10 evangelical interpretations of Genesis 1 and 2. I won't cover every one of those, and I'll substitute some other ones in, but in general, there's sort of 10 possible evangelical views of interpretation of Genesis 1 and 2. And so I want to go over some of these, and I want to introduce them by looking at three basic modern ways of interpreting Genesis 1 and 2. There's what is known as the completely literal view, and there are actually 5 of those completely literal views. You thought there was only one. There's actually 5 completely literal views that take the days of creation as 24-hour days. There's actually 5. There's the essentially literal view. And so some of these others would say we are literalists, but we understand some of the words in their connotative sense rather than denotative sense. That is, and we'll see what's meant by that. I see day maybe in a different way, or see another way. And then there's some essentially non-literal views, and those we'll look at 3 of those as well, just real briefly though. And the trajectory here is we're going to work through some of these literal, essentially literal, and essentially non-literal views. And we may talk about, there's always discussion on what the church fathers say. Oh, for 2,000 years we've been reading it literally, and all the church fathers agreed it's literal. That's actually not quite true. We'll see that they read it in a variety of ways. So it's not that there's. I know that may be scandalous to some, but you can read the church fathers for yourself and find that out. And then we'll zero in on 3 primary sort of major candidates, the 3 most common ways of reading Genesis 1 and 2, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on those, but I'm just going to give you a cursory overview of some of these other ones, and then we'll focus in on those 3 a little bit more, and we'll have a discussion about strengths and weaknesses of each of those views when we get to them. So some of the completely literal views, one is the gap theory. Now, what I mean by completely literal is they take the days of creation as 24-hour periods and say that there were 7 of them, but then the nature, 6 creation days and a 7th day of rest, but the nature of those will differ in each of these. So there's the gap theory. Now, a gap theory, I think I mentioned when we were reading Genesis 1:1 and then Genesis 1:2, and then what follows. So Genesis 1 and 2, and then what follows is the idea here is that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He creates everything that exists. The gap theory says, then somehow there was a cataclysmic destruction, and the earth then was formless and void. So creation, and then it just some kind of cataclysm, and then the earth was now was left to just formless and void. And then there's the 7 days of creation. And so the age of the earth, the age of the universe is 14. The age of the universe is about 13.8 billion years. The age of the earth is 4.5 billion years. But then it was recreated about 6,000 years ago in the way it is now. So there was a big gap where cataclysm had happened. The second, so that's just an overview of that. There are some problems reading the Hebrew with that. It doesn't seem like it says the earth became formless and void. It just says it was formless and void. So there does seem like there's some continuity in verses 1 and 2. So that's one of the problems with the Hebrew. The intermittent day theory takes the days as literal days, 7 24-hour days, but it says that there was a period of time between each day. So there was a 24-hour day where creation happened, and then a long, undeterminate amount of time, and then another 24-hour day when the next day of creation happened, and then a long, indeterminate amount of time, and then a 24-hour period when the next part of creation happened. So this is an intermittent day theory. There's a day, and there was a literal 24-hour day, and night, and then a long time, and then another day. So one of the issues with that is that the text seems to be consecutive. It doesn't seem to be, it seems to be that, well, there's no indication there's an intermittent, a long indeterminate period of time. So it's what we call an ad hoc hypothesis. And ad hoc means as needed. So it's, in other words, there's no evidence for it. They've just added it in because it helps them make sense of something. That isn't always the best way definitely not the best way to do science, not always the best way to do biblical studies either. In other words, it amounts to what we call in logic, I teach logic at the college, appeal to ignorance. That is, it basically, we don't know something, therefore we know something. That's kind of what it ends up being like. So there are problems with that theory as well. I'm trying to point out there are strengths of each issue, but I'm trying to point out like some of the flaws that people have pointed out with each of these theories. The revelatory day theory, this one's very interesting. They see the evening, the morning and evening, or evening and morning and day 1 as days that the creation account was revealed to Moses. So on day 1, this is Moses' life, not the days of creation. So on the first day that Moses sat down and was inspired, he wrote about the first, the creation of light. And then God was done revealing that day revealing to him for the day. So he writes, oh, and now there's evening and there's morning, day 1. That is, I've now spent one day listening to God and writing this, only 2 verses apparently. Took God a long time to dictate. I don't know if Moses was hard of hearing or, but those are revelatory days. And I joke, we can talk about dictation or whatever, but in other words, those were days that Moses was inspired. And so there's almost like there's a separation before evening and morning, day 1. it's almost like he's writing and inspired, and then he says, oh, and now it's the end of the day, so I'm going to go home, and maybe tomorrow he'll reveal some more, and the next day God reveals something else, and then he writes, well, that was evening and morning. That was my evening and morning, that second day, what we call the second day of creation. So that's a revelatory day theory. Absolutely no indication of Scripture that's the case. Again, it's an ad hoc hypothesis, so it's weak in that way. I mean, could it be? Sure, it could be, just like intermittent day could be. But there's just not the evidence in the text. It's difficult to defend because there just isn't anything that supports that, at least in the text itself. So it could be, though. I'm not. I mean, God can work however God wants to work. The local creation theory basically says that God created everything that exists, and then the 7 days were a local, like in a locality. God created all of the, God created light. He opened up the skies in that area and created light on day one. And on day two, there was, you could see then the sky, the clouds in the sky or something. On day three, you have vegetation growing in that area, or God creates in that area vegetation. So that creation happened, but then the 7 days, as described in Genesis 1, happened in a local, in a small little area, the area that Adam was going to be in, maybe the garden or some local area. But again, it takes the days as literal, but just on a local event basis. There are two, young Earth theory or young Earth creationism, we just abbreviate YEC. There's two varieties of this. One is called they would just say it's literal, that the Earth is literally only 6,000, well, I looked it up, 5,768 or something like that is the year, the Jewish year. The Jewish calendar, by the way, goes, they don't use AD, obviously, because they don't believe in Jesus, Anno Domini. So they just go from the year, according to the Bible, the way they figured is the origin of the Earth. And they just count that way. So it's year 5,886, I think, in the Jewish calendar. Someone can check me if you want, but it's something like that, or maybe 5,868. Anyway, the young Earth view would say the Earth is only that old, and geologists and others have just misunderstood the data, and the dating systems they use don't work. That flood geology actually makes all the geology work and other ways of dating work. Okay, that's the flood, what we call the flood geology, young Earth theory, that it literally is only that Earth. The other is what's sometimes called the mature creation or appearance of age theory. And it says, just like God created Adam at age, like he just came to be at age 25 or so, roughly 25. They think, a mature, an adult who is able to have kids and, things like that. I don't know why they land on 25, but, just like when God created Adam, he created him full grown. He could have created, and his bones, if you would have tested them, they'd be like 25-year-old bones, and that he could have created the whole universe that way, within appearance, fully matured, basically. Fully matured in the age it is now. So that's the appearance of age, or the mature creation theory, version of the young Earth theory. So there's the two. Still would only be that old, 6,000 years or so, 6 to 10,000 years old, but it appears to be much older because it was created fully mature. Okay. Again, those could certainly be the case. It takes Genesis 1 seriously, literally, all those things. There may be, so the problem with this theory is actually not so much interpretive, but scientific. That it seems to either ignore a lot of science or reinterpret it in a way that really ends up being not scientific. So that could be an issue with this one. So some essentially non-literal, or some essentially literal views The day-age theory we'll talk about much more later. The day-age theory sees the days as long periods of time, and so it interprets day. The reason why it's literal is they take the days literally, but literally in an alternate meaning, in their connotative sense of a long period of time. We'll talk about that more when we get, when we get to the day-age theory. We'll talk a lot more about that. The liturgical view sees the earth as the temple of God, that God is constructing sort of his temple. I'm a little less familiar with this view, but basically it sees creation as it's maybe analogical, or not, maybe not analogical, but symbolic. That is, God is creating his temple in 7 days and getting it prepared. And so this is maybe typological is a better way to think about this. But they'd still say the 7 days or 7 days, but there's 7 days where God is creating his temple and using sort of maybe symbolic language or something like that. The framework view we'll talk about a lot more later. It says basically that they would say, if you read, so the reason why it's literal is because they take the days as literal days, but they see this as the whole thing, the whole Genesis 1 is the type of genre that would look at symmetry. So they're reading it literally, but they're saying it's not a narrative genre. It's not the genre of straightforward historical narrative. That it's a genre of like maybe a poetic type of genre or a way. So it could still take the days in their connotative sense. That is, they do mean something, but not in a 24-hour denotative sense of what we would normally think of as normal days. But it looks more at the framework of, we'll get into this later, and you'll understand it a little better. I even have a handout for you. The analogical day theory takes the days as literal days, but basically it says that Genesis 1 is an analogy. God is working within human normal work times, that there's a pattern of work and rest. And so we work during the day, we rest at night, or we take our break at night, and we work during the day, we take our break at night, just like human beings do that. And they see it as tied to Exodus 20, where it talks about the Sabbath, 7 days or 6 days you'll work, and the seventh day you rest. So they see it as analogical to that, and as that it's matching up with that, so that the pattern is what matters. The pattern of days and rest, and days and rest, and then the seventh day resting like we do. So we work during the day, we sleep at night. God works during the day. He doesn't work at night. So that's why evening and morning, right? It's evening and morning. So there's that time period when there's no creative activity happening. And then the next day he has creative activity. This one also is a stretch. It does seem like, if we have the seventh day of rest, it seems like we wouldn't need to rest at night. There's some issues with this one. Not at all clear. It's an analogy, although some church fathers read things analogically as well. So a couple of non-essential or essentially non-literal views. One is to say that Genesis 1 and 2 is just another creation myth alongside the other creation myths in the ancient world. It's a parable. Maybe it has some basic truths in story form, something of this sort. You are straining the limits, I think, of then a Christian interpretation at this point. But I did have a college professor of Old Testament. Of course, he got his PhD at Harvard. That should tell you something. who read this as a strictly myth, and I think he was still a Christian. He still believed in Jesus, but a very just sort of saw it as a myth alongside other ancient myths. Yeah, and you know, there are reasons for that. The problem is, I think there are things. Here's where some of the issues lie with a lot of these non-literal views, and I'm not saying they're not right, but the New Testament seems to treat, and Jesus seems to treat many of the elements in Genesis 1 and 2 as literal, or you know, in some way, shape, or form. And Paul, when he talks about in Romans 5, and we'll talk about this later, does seem to indicate there was a real Adam. Because if Adam didn't bring sin into the world, and it says through one man, Adam brought sin into the world, so through one man, the resolution to that, the fix to that, right? So it does seem like there's a real Adam, that this is not just a myth. So this is difficult to square with the rest of Scripture, I guess, because it does seem like in the New Testament the authors take this seriously and not as a myth, but as at least parts of it as narrative. And there's a source critical view. So this is again scholarly view. There was a German in the 19th century named Julius Wellhausen, and he theorized that Genesis, well, the first 5 books of the New Testament, first 6 books maybe, were written late, like in the around 450 BC, so during the Babylonian exile or just after the return of the Babylonian exile. And so they were edited and put together, and they've identified 4 editors. There were the Yahwists, who we know who they were because they refer to God as Yahweh. They're the Elohists because they refer to God as Elohim. There was the priestly source, and their interest was more ritual and priestly and worship and things like that. And then there was the Deuteronomists, and the Deuteronomists were more interested in the law and keeping the law. And they found these 4 sources in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So they see Genesis 1 is written by the Elohists. After all, God is referred to as Elohim. And chapter 2 was written by the Yahwists, or maybe even the priestly source, because the priests would also refer to God as Yahweh, because there's some covenantal language in it. So they would see this, that there's a religious purpose for the story, or that they would say 2 stories. They would say there's actually two creation accounts, and they're different and irreconcilable. This is what this theory would say, and that there's a different purpose for each one. There's a different purpose for chapter 1 and a different purpose for chapter 2 religiously. They were interested in different things. So that's, I mean, scholarship at this point is beyond the source critical view. It was big in vogue until about 1980 or so. And maybe in Germany it still is, because they're behind American evangelicals. But I don't think it's very prominent today in scholarly circles, at least in America. Again, maybe in Germany there's some holdouts, because they're the guy who thought of it was German, and all the German scholars have just gobbled it up and used it, and so they like their German. You know, they have the German pride, right? They want to keep that going. I just don't know that it's. I think there's been a lot of holes poked in it. It also strikes me as odd that when human beings come up with some new way of interpreting a new method, there's some value to it, but it also seems a little arrogant to me that no one's ever thought of this until we came on the scene, and now we've got it figured out. You know, that it seems a little bit, and notice where a lot of these come after the Enlightenment, after the age of human reason, where human reason can figure everything out, right? So there's a little arrogance that goes with that, I think, and I think so. I think God will have the last laugh. I'll just say that. So the religion-only view basically says this is it had religious meaning, so it basically wants to separate what we call what we sometimes refer as overlapping magisterium. We'll talk about science and theology overlap sometimes, but this religion-only view says they don't overlap. That this is only supposed to teach us something about religion and not say anything about science. That we need to separate science completely. And this is just, Genesis 1 is just a religious thing. It's just about religion. And when we do science, we can just do science however we want. And when we do religion, we hold to Genesis 1 as we would. So it's a exclusion of the overlapping magisterium. I don't know if that. Yeah, Galileo actually. Yeah. He thought that church can do theology and he can do science, and they doesn't have to overlap, doesn't have to add up, right? Yeah. Okay, so that's a brief overview of some of the three, the literal view, the essentially literal, and the non-essential, or essentially non-literal. So I wanted to talk briefly about ancient ways of reading Genesis 1 and 2. So when we talk about ancient, I'm talking about the church fathers, so the first 400 or 500 years of the church. These are bishops. They're of churches, major churches. They're pastoral theologians. They're thinking theologically. They know the scripture well. They're translating and copying and reading and preaching. And when they read the scripture, any scripture, not just Genesis 1 and 2, they read it on 4 levels. They read it on the literal level. That is, what does it literally say? And they say, okay, it says that. They read it on a symbolic, and I think the better word here is typological level. So Adam is a type of Christ. There's typology in Genesis 1. If you want to say Adam is Christ, then Eve is the church, and there's typology there and things like that. So they read it on a symbolic or typological. They would read it on an allegorical level. So they would see it, again, not as literal, but this is more of the spiritual meaning. There's a spiritual meaning beyond this. I don't know, I have actually different notes on this. I thought I had notes on this. Yeah. So the literal, what the text says, the typological types identified: man, woman, serpent, tree of knowledge, tree of life, heaven, earth. Allegorical, the story of creation is sort of a spiritual. So in chapter 1, they would read that. Some of them read that as a spiritual, and the second was literal. So they would read it that way. Could also, an allegorical method might be also the story, for instance, in Genesis 3 is the story of, allegorically, it's speaking of all of our sin, that we've all come to sin. Just like Adam, we've sought to know good and evil by ourselves, and without reference to God, by ourselves, we've sought knowledge apart from God. That's the allegorical reading of it. And then the theological or spiritual method, which basically looks at what does this say about God? What does this say about human beings? What does this say about creation? What does this say about sin? So the theological themes that came through. I did a little bit of that, I think, last week when we talked about what's the most important things you get out of Genesis 1. If you get nothing else, make sure you get that God created, that he created it orderly, that it was easy for him, that he's the majesty, he's the king, he's in charge, that everything was good or functioned the way it was supposed to, that human beings are special creations, we're made in the image of God. I mean, there's some things that the theological method, and these were not, by the way, exclusive to each other. They read on all 4 levels at the same time. So they saw it as literal, they saw it as symbolic, they saw it as allegorical and theological all at the same time. And you don't have, they're not mutually exclusive. I think last week I talked about how all the things we can get out of Genesis 1 can be all true at the same time. They can all fit together. So here's a couple of examples of these methods. So the literal method, 7-day creation, or first and second creation, maybe if you want to out-literal the literals, because it does seem like a new beginning in chapter 2, verse 4, right? We talked about that. Ella Toledo, these are the generations. That's a new beginning of a section. So some people would see it that way. Symbolic, the framework, and the typological. Those are some symbolic. We talked about typological a little bit. Some of the allegorical methods, a psychological view, that is, what happens to Adam happens to us. We all do the same thing. The analogical theory that this is the work day, the work rest or work rhythm is analogical. Spiritual creation theory, that's Genesis 1 is spiritual, Genesis 2 is literal. That would be an allegorical method. And then the theological methods. Now, the church fathers noticed, as scholars do today, that there's anti-pagan rhetoric going on in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. And some of that anti-pagan rhetoric is, I maybe mentioned this before, in Egypt, if you look at the context, I think when I was talking about context, there was Ra, the sun god. There was Osiris, I believe, was the moon god. I think that's right. There were Apis, like the bull god. There were gods for frogs, all gods for all the animals, gods for all the, and those things were thought to have power over their domains, that somehow they would control those domains. But what Genesis 1 does is it strips them of their power. So for instance, the sun had the power to shine light and to make things grow. In Genesis 1, light and plant growth comes before the creation of, the way it says it in Genesis 1 is the greater light. It doesn't even call it the sun, doesn't even have a name. It just has a description, the greater light. Because if you give it a name, somehow you give it authority or power or something like that. So just a greater light and the lesser light. This was. You also see God creating out of nothing. In the pagan theories, the gods had to do battle. There was bloodshed. Creation was created out of the dead gods or out of parts of them, or human beings sometimes were out of the droplets of the blood of the gods or something like that, where there's like a violence and chaos. But when God creates, it's out of order. There's no one that challenges him. He doesn't have to fight anyone off. Even the sea monsters, which were these fearsome beasts, right, that the Hebrews would have been scared of, were created by him and of no threat to them. So these are all the things that are created in Genesis 1 would point to different ideas about different gods. And basically it's saying they are not gods. There's only one. It was easy. All you had to do was say it. There was no battle, no cosmic battle. There's no threat. Like there's no threat to anything. And it's this this kingship of God, the kingship of God. And he doesn't have any rivals. So this is the anti-pagan theory. And you could look in Genesis chapter 2, it continues that theme. And there is a really, I'm not elaborating as much as I could on that, but that's definitely a theological understanding of Genesis 1. And it's a solid, we still use that today. And then there's the covenantal theory that there's a covenant established perhaps with creation, and definitely in chapter 2 it appears to be with human beings. God does things and says things about creation and gives commands. When God establishes things about creation and he gives commands, that's a lot like a covenant, that we are his creation. He is the sovereign, and we are the vassal, or we are the ones who are beholden to him. And so when he gives us commands, we're supposed to do those commands. It's supposed to instruct us. Covenants were ways of giving instruction and ways of getting at, this is how you're supposed to relate to the other. God will relate to us in certain ways, and we'll relate to him in certain ways. And in Genesis chapter 2, there's even a covenant between the man and the woman, the marriage covenant. So another covenantal relationship. This is how you're supposed to relate to each other as man and woman in a marriage. And there's the first poem is now is flesh of my flesh and bone of my bones. So there's covenantal language there anyway. And I think I talked about the wisdom literature in Genesis 1, and wisdom literature, in as much as there's commands to follow, is related sometimes to covenantal relationships. The biblical wisdom was always just doing what God says, following God's commands. That's primarily what biblical wisdom is. And so there's this, everything should do what it's supposed to do. Everything, God wills it to be a certain way, and it is that way, or it should be that way, and it should continue to be that way. That covenant gets broken by us in Genesis chapter 3, right? We break it, and there's consequences. So if there wasn't a covenant, there wouldn't be a breaking of the covenant with sin in chapter 3, and there wouldn't be a way that God then has to deal with us, treat us, there's punishment. So there's commands and punishment. Those are rewards and punishment, if you will. And of course, there's a command to not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and there's a punishment if you do, which is covenantal language as well. Anyway, those are some of the theological methods. So I'm going to pause there. Are there questions or anything you want to ask more about or talk more about that I've covered so far? Yeah. Yeah.
That somehow implies that he could become, that he had exerted himself during the creation.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if you would.
Yeah. So. Right. Yeah. So the idea in Hebrew is it's not necessarily that he's tired, but it's this idea of shalom or of peace. And so it's almost like in the idea of shalom, things are good. Things are going well. And so that's the greeting today in Israel. You'd say shalom. And basically it's like saying, I hope you're well. I hope all is well with you. You don't have any conflict. I hope there's peace, that type of thing. So this idea of rest is this idea of there's no conflict. There's nothing left undone. Things are well. Things are as they should be. What's that? Peaceful. Yeah. Peace. I mean, shalom is translated peace sometimes, right? It's a fuller word than even peace. I mean, it is this sort of rest. You can rest easy. That's the idea. It's not that he's tired. It's just that creation is what it should be. So, he doesn't have to do anything else. It's completed. Yeah.
Concept. But multiple times when he says, and it was good.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean perfect. It means functioning as it was created to be.
That's right.
And so if things are functioning as they should be, then shalom.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. When everything's going well, when it is as it should be, when things are as they should be, then shalom is, and we're all looking forward to that. There will be shalom in heaven, ultimate shalom. In our life, there's times when things seem to be going well, but not perfect yet. But in heaven, it will be perfect. We'll have perfect shalom. It's almost a word that that is a hope for us. If I said shalom to you, I'm saying I hope for you all is well. I hope for you you find peace. I hope for you find rest. So perfect shalom will be in heaven. Yeah. What's that?
Also, it's hi and bye.
Yeah, hello and goodbye. Yeah, yep. Kind of like aloha in Hawaii, right? Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions or?
Here's 5786.
5786. Okay, I was off by 100 years. I think I said 5886 verse. Okay, 5786. So it's the Jewish year 5786. Yeah. Yeah. Good. So we're going to look at three primary methods. Oh, methods. What? I guess I didn't check my spelling. It's funny. I always do this. If I let AI do it, it probably wouldn't spell it, but it might get some things wrong, other than spelling. AI is good at spelling. It's not always good at content. They say about 1/4 of the time it gives you something wrong. So I don't use AI. You can tell. Okay. I'm not going to fix it because then everyone will know I made these slides, not AI. So for three primary methods of reading Genesis 1 and 2 today, there's the literal view, the age day view, and the framework verb. We're going to get into a little more depth in each of these. And then I want us to think, as we're thinking about this, reflect on Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And I want to ask you for strengths and weaknesses or critique, like a critical assessment of each of these. Both what are the strengths, what are the really good things about this view, and what are some of the maybe questions or things that may be difficulties, I'd say. So the literal view, literal interpretation, Genesis 1 is read literally and chronologically, really important. And so day means a 24-hour period. It's the denotative meaning. It literally means what we commonly refer to as a day, a 24-hour day. So when it comes to science, we try to square it with science. The Bible is primary, and science needs to fit with a literal biblical account. And so science is critiqued often. So one of the things they do, and maybe Lloyd will talk about this, but that you may have heard, well, radiocarbon dating isn't accurate. And so some of the advocates of this view will take radiocarbon dating, which, by the way, is only good within like up to 50,000 years old. Once you go past 50,000 years, it doesn't measure accurately. It actually says it's only 50,000 or less years old. That's just the way radiocarbon dating works. So they use argon dating and other things and Lloyd will explain this to you. But they use other forms of dating for things that are prior to that. But what they'll do is they'll take what science will say is a 4 billion year old rock. They'll radiocarbon date it, and they'll say, see, it says it's only 50,000 years old, so radiocarbon dating is all wrong. Well, it's because they're using that method for something it was not meant to be used for. If you're using it to date animal bones from 10,000 years ago, it's pretty accurate. Once you get beyond 50,000 years, it loses its accuracy. In fact, it will say things are much younger than they actually are, because that's just the way carbon-14, particularly the half-life decay rate is not. It doesn't work beyond 50,000 years. And Lloyd, I apologize if you're gonna talk about this later, so I'll. Oh, you weren't. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So they use different techniques. I think argon and there's a couple. Yeah, there's a couple other radioactive isotopes that they can measure. Yeah, so they'll either do that, or they'll say that there's a problem with methodological naturalism itself, which is the method that science uses, or the presupposition science uses. And the idea is that maybe the way we measure things, it just can't be measured. Like maybe, or maybe there's not. So let me get this right. Science uses, what's it called? Uniformitarianism, right? They assume that things are uniform, that decay rates are uniform over time, that speciation is uniform over time, more or less. I mean, there's some problems with uniformitarianism, but because there's a Cambrian explosion, some other things that I'm sure Andy will talk about. But that typically things happen in the past like they're happening now, that they're not that different. And so some literal interpreters will say, well, the Bible's primary, so the Bible tells us, so science must be wrong about uniformitarianism. Then so they favor catastrophism, and I think Lloyd will talk about catastrophism. Yeah. This is yeah. So this is where you get flood geology and things like that. So that they have found some scientific theories or scientific ways of operating that can square with the Bible, but the Bible is very primary. This is very admirable. I admire this a great deal, and I'm not telling you my view either. I mean, I may or may not subscribe to this. I may or may not subscribe to others. I'm trying to be perfectly objective, completely objective, not to skew your view. So that science, though, they do their science in a way that presupposes a young Earth, or at least a young appearance of the Earth. Yeah.
One of the things that I not to comment or editorialize here, but is finding evidence of these things or that fits with this. And one of the things that I found interesting, because I'm in love with the Southwest and with what are now referred to as ancestral Pueblans, the indigenous inhabitants of the Southwest. And so some of the young Earth creationists have said that they have identified in ancestral Pueblan petroglyphs dinosaurs.
Okay.
So, which, I mean, you have to account for dinosaurs somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And so saying that here's the evidence that dinosaurs and human beings coexisted at some point.
Yeah, and there's in the Bible it's mentioned the sea monsters and then the behemoth, and we don't know what these creatures were, but most scholars would say they're something like a giant squid, and maybe the behemoth would be like an elephant or a hippopotamus or something. But we actually don't know what they are. And so there's also, if you read the extended version of Daniel or the story of Bela and the dragon, there are dragons I mentioned. So it could be, I mean, that's a possibility for accounting for at least some dinosaurs, remnants of dinosaurs or something like that. So there are ways that they'll talk about the dinosaurs, because they have to account for those as well, right? So they generally read Genesis 2 as a zoomed in account of day 6. So it's a beginning at day 6. If you get to Genesis 2:4, it's day 6, and it's localized, zoomed into the garden. So everything else was created everywhere else, but then in the garden there had been no rain, and in the garden there was no shrub, and in the garden where Adam was created, then a garden is planted after Adam is created, and that will account for some of the what we call dischronologies in chapter 2 with chapter 1. There seems to be some apparent dischronologies, and you have to figure that out. So they would zoom it in and say, well, this is day 6, and it was just in the garden that there was no shrub, and it's just in the garden it had not rained, and just in the garden that all these things happened. So that's one way of dealing with it. And maybe just in the garden where the animals are created to see if there's any helpmate suitable. I mean that it creates a difficulty. And so I want us to talk about any questions, problems, strengths, weaknesses of this view. And I just want you to be honest. Again, I'm not, I think Lloyd might be the only one in here that knows my view. So I have no judgment on any of this.
I have a comment I'd like to make. I've been reading some about kind of most of the modern physics and science and stuff. And most scientists these days say that the thing that we understand the least is time from a science point of view. And it's interesting that most of the conflict between the Bible and science is all based on time. I mean, that's the major differences we see is the question of time. And, you know, there's really wild stuff in Einstein's theories about what can happen to time that's mind-boggling to read that and say, like, you know, if you're close to a black hole and something, you can add, you know, several thousand years in a couple of minutes to time. And so to me, that's just a very interesting thing that science has a real problem with time, and that seems to be the conflict with Genesis 1 and science is time.
Yeah, that's good. I think, you know, there's, I mean, I guess in the space shuttle, doesn't time, there's something about time there. It moves slower or something. Yeah, so even as close as that, I think maybe there's one theory, the closer you get to the speed of light, I mean, that's one theory. I don't know if you'll talk about those theories, Lloyd, or not, but yeah, okay. We won't bother him with that. Yeah. Yeah, so I think one of the theories is, and this is one of the, excuse me, essentially literal theories, is that before there was a creation of sun and moon, or greater and lesser lights, days could be different. For the first 3 days could be radically different, because we measure days by rotation of the earth around the sun and months by the moon. And so maybe before those lights appeared or were made, then time maybe worked different. So that's a theory, is time worked different in those 7 days of creation than it does now. Okay, that's good. Any other problems or questions or comments or, yeah.
Moses chose for day?
It's yom, and there's only one word for day, and it means, like, could mean 4 different things. Hebrew is a very small language. I think there's like 3,600 words in Hebrew or something. So every word, the root of every word is only 3 letters long, and there are no vowels between them. And so one word, depending on how you pronounce it, and we don't have the pronunciation, we don't have the vowel pointing, so we don't know. David, you know about this. Yeah, we don't know how, you know, a lot of it's context as to what it means. So, but the word Yom Tov means good day, or Boker Tov, good, you know, good morning. I'm sorry. Okay.
So Marty is correct. There is time dilation, which takes place at speeds near the speed of light, according to Einstein's special theory of relativity, and also in the vicinity of a great mass or significant gravity. That's the general theory of relativity. Those are not common experiences or common places, right? You don't normally travel anywhere near the speed of light, nor are you spending time near a black hole. So I don't think scientists have as much trouble with time as might be thought of, because we don't normally engage in those situations. I've never had a problem with time, but I'm not much of a scientist.
You think that creation of the universe might involve some very fast speeds and some large masses? But it did.
Yeah, so Lloyd is conceding that they did involve large or fast speeds and large masses, but yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, yeah,
But, time concept would not be, anything to think about if you didn't have the matter to begin with. Because then, you can't degrade or it's not birth or, so there's no counting the time if there's no matter.
yeah,
In the beginning, when it was boy, and then became so.
okay, yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to move on. I think we need, yeah, sure.
Seems to me, and this is not systematic and I can't give any sort of statistics or evidence, but it seems like the literal interpretation in recent years, last 20, 30, maybe longer, is among evangelicals is, I wouldn't necessarily say dominant, but it's grown to me from my perspective. And, Ken Ham has built quite an empire off of this, with this amusement, I guess you'd call it amusement empire in Kentucky. And, but also I think in terms of, growth of, I don't have any statistics, but just observationally, I think a lot of homeschool curriculum teaches a literal interpretation of Genesis. So I don't, just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think what happens, maybe there may be a sense in which the more Christianity seems to be marginalized, the more people will dig in. And one of the things they're digging in on is not necessarily, I think for some, it's not necessarily about, 7-day young earth. It's about biblical inerrancy and authority. And they see this as the only way to sort of defend biblical inerrancy, biblical inspiration, biblical authority, infallibility, those things that are being challenged by the world. So I think that's maybe a tendency we have as a reaction to the challenges that a lot of people want to sort of dig in more on this. So that may be the reason. It seems to me that's the way it's going. And I think the homeschool curriculum that has this, again, it's pushing back against the maybe I don't know, Lloyd, you meant like over scientism. I mean, the scientists have become the new priesthood, in the white robes and the medical, the doctors. So it seems like it's a push back against or a reclaiming of some territory or something that they feel like it's been lost. Yeah. Yeah.
History with all these different interpretations. Has there ever been a bloody religious war fought over?
Probably not bloody. There's been some debates, some pretty serious debates. I think we're going to have Ben Brandenburg, Dr. Brandenburg coming. So Dr. Brandenburg will talk about the history of the debate, I think later on, and so he'll go through about the last 200 years of this debate since Darwin, really. Maybe even before Darwin, but yeah, that'll be a good discussion. I do have 2 more views to get through, and well, okay, only have 25 minutes to get through.
I would just say that I don't believe Ken Ham would be as charitable as you in terms of whether a literal view is essential or not. So
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I think that is one of the things that.
But yeah, there are other young earthers who are more generous. Kurt Wise is a scientist who is pretty generous, and he'll basically say like, yeah, our science still has a long way to go. We're not where we should be, but we're going to keep trying. I believe he's a geologist. Is that right, Kurt Wise? Yeah. But he's a scientist he's a Christian. He's also a scientist. He's also a young earther and has worked on this a lot. He says the science isn't quite there. He'll admit the science isn't quite there, but we're working on it. And he's also pretty generous. He's yeah. Well, let's talk about the day-age view. So in the day-age view, day or yom, that's the Hebrew word. You asked about that, I think, has various meanings. It can mean at, like a period of time, like in that day would mean at that time. So in general, could mean day, it could be a 24-hour day. It could be a long period of time, like a day. We would think of an era. They didn't have the word like epic and era like we have. So they would just use day for a long period of time as well. And there's a couple verses, I think in Psalms, it talks about for 1,000 years is like a day to the Lord. We have to, and there's also, yeah. Was that Moses? Yeah. Yeah. That's the only Psalm of Moses, I think, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
It's like an evening gone. So
Oh, yeah, right. So the hymn writer just magnified that.
Be, interpreted as not 1,000 days, but 1,000 ages.
Well, 1,000 years, it says, is like a day. I suppose years, maybe you stretch the meaning there to a connotative sense. I stretch them both, yeah. There's also in Isaiah, there's a passage about a day. Days can mean longer times. So we'll talk about maybe why that's could be problematic, because both of those are poetic. The Psalm is poetic, and when in the place in Isaiah is also a poetic oracle. So there's a poetic sense of day, perhaps. Anyway, so in Genesis, day one day means a long or indeterminate period of time in which something happened. That's the connotative. We talked about denotative and connotative sense. But the sequence is correct in Genesis 1 for age day theorists, right? Because it's just the days that mean something different. So God spoke in initial creation on each day, but then it developed over that day period. So this would give time for things like evolution and Earth and star development and things like that. Because a day starts and then it ends when that period of creation ends. So yeah, we're currently in the seventh day, resting from determining new creation. I'm not sure what I meant by that, but we're currently in the second, maybe resting until the new creation comes. The eighth day will be the new heaven and new earth. So science is used to show that the order of the days or ages is chronologically correct with some modification to the meanings of certain Hebrew words. And so there's some things. One of the problems is we don't have the sun, moon, and stars created or appearing, at least, until day 4, where we have vegetation growing on the earth, presumably without a sun. Right? This creates a problem scientifically for this to be chronological. So they would say it was overcast for that period, and then the sun, moon, and stars appeared. And it is true, the Hebrew word is a little different there. We have creation, bara or bereshi, and we have asa, which means to make, means something. It's a little bit different. Some people, I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. Some people say that asa is to make something out of something that existed, or to form it out of something that existed, or to make it appear or something. I don't know that that's, I just don't know my Hebrew well enough to know that argument holds water, because I've heard from some scholars that doesn't hold water and from others it does. So I don't know. I know Hebrew. I'm not a world-class scholar, so I would hesitate to make that distinction. But there is different words used, and you see sometimes it's reflected in the English. You'll see create and make or appear or things like that. So they would say that those things appeared because they were already there with light, like at the beginning, when he created light, those things were there. And then, and the heavens would be the atmosphere. God creates on the day 2 the atmosphere around the earth that allows things to grow, so that we're not radiated by the sun and destroyed or whatever, because we need this atmosphere, or else we'd be cooked, right? Yeah. Keeps it the right temperature, keeps everything's so perfect. This universe. Yeah, Goldilocks. Yeah, but it's something like 42 dials of Goldilocks. It's amazing. And more than that, even, if it depends on how much you take into consideration. So yeah, science is used to show the order of days. Okay, so Genesis 2 gives a zoom in of day 6 again, when human beings are created. So that's any comments, questions, critiques, complaints? It tries to deal with some of the inconsistencies.
Allow modern science.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, I mean, I guess if day 6 is a long period of time, I think there may be. So evolutionary theory, I think, differs sometimes on whether birds came before land animals or vice versa. There's I don't know biology. I'm sure Andy will tell us. But there's some other possible issues, and of course, if human beings evolved from apes, it doesn't seem like so special of a creation, but maybe God could make it special by at some point. Yeah, so common ancestors. Okay, yeah. I'm sure Andy will clear that up, maybe, or maybe muddy it up. I don't know. Maybe I hope Andy's listening. But so there's some potential issues with the order and with some of the special. When we think of special creation, and by the way, age-dayers will differ on this. Some will say man was a special creation. There was a sudden, like break from everything. And others will say, well, there's at some point, Neanderthal, I'm not sure, Andy could probably tell us, became human or Homo sapien at some point, and that's when God inspirited him or ensouled him or something like that. Yeah, there's some, they'll have ways to resolve that.
Here's Andy. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I'm trying not to put my own 2 cents worth in.
I guess not.
I think one major issue with this view, and it is an attempt to match the science with the scripture. And Hugh Ross is one of the major proponents of this. He's an astrophysicist who now does Christian apologetics. The danger is the same danger that the church faced at the time of Galileo with tying your theology to any science. You never want to do that because science is going to change.
Yeah, so there's I mean, you'll talk about God of the gaps and concordism. Okay, I'll leave that to you then. So, yeah, I think Lloyd, when Lloyd gets to talk about his part of this, I think he'll talk about some of these issues and what he just mentioned. So for the sake of time, we have, I don't know, 12 minutes or something, 15 minutes. Yeah, 15 minutes. So, okay. Well, framework is going to take more than one slide. So, any other questions or comments on this? Okay. The third major view, and I think some of these books that Lloyd has out here, John Walton, he has, I'm trying to remember the names of the books, but he's a scholar out of Wheaton, and he holds to what's called the framework interpretation. He's not the only one. There are others, Meredith Klein, some other biblical scholars who hold to this view. And basically, it's that we already experienced this, but or we already talked a little bit about this forming and filling. I want to go into a little more detail. So the framework interpretation says that that Genesis 1 is narrated in topical order, not necessarily chronological order. So you think, why would there be why would it not be chronological order? I mean, if this is a straightforward narrative, but what we find is in the Hebrew, there are other chronologizations in the Hebrew Bible in other places. That is, there's sometimes temporal recapitulation where something happens and then later on it's the same narrative happens again. It happens actually in the book of Exodus and the book of Numbers. The book of there's some recapitulation, temporal recapitulation in some of the history books, 1st and 2nd Samuel, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. There's some temporal recapitulation where an event happens and it's recorded, and then later on it's recorded again. So it's not foreign to the biblical corpus or to Scripture. So they would say, well, this is the days then are picture frames. So you need some sort of framing to separate each day so that you see the symmetry of the forming and filling. And so the days become these picture frames. So we can clearly see day 1 is the forming, and day 4 is the filling of that thing that was formed. And day 2 is the forming, and day 5 is the filling of that thing that was formed. And day 3 is the forming, and day 6 is the filling of that thing that was formed. And they use days as frames in order to really easily see the connection. That's the idea here. So days are picture frames. There's a fiat fulfillment construction indicates these were actual historical events. So God said something, it happened. In other words, God really did create everything, and he created everything just by fiat, just by commanding it to come into existence. But the timing is not. It's a chronologization. Such a hard word to say. And so the timing may not be sequential. It may not be sequential. And so the advocates of a literary framework only, that is, we're only going to see this as a literary framework and not also as literal, or not also as day age, and not also as something else, would see this. This is a type of literature that has these non-literal elements and non-sequential elements, so that it's not literally 6 days in a certain order. It's just structured in such a way to fill in what I would call a problem solution format. There's a problem of there's no form and there's nothing, there's void. It's formless and void, or formless and empty. So we have to form it and we have to fill it. That solves the problem that's stated in Genesis 1 chapter 2, or chapter 1 verse 2. And this means that science can work independently from Scripture, since the days are not chronological but topical, arranged for the fiat fulfillment motif, arranged for this forming and filling in this problem solution motif. Then science can do whatever it needs to do, because this was not meant to be a literal sequential thing. It was meant to show how God forms and fills, how everything got to be the way it is. So the non-literal element, I think I talked about St. Augustine. He talks about time and what time is and how time is created, and very interesting. In the Confessions, I think it's chapter 10 or 11, or book 10 or 11, he talks about time being uncreated until after creation. So there wasn't any really time in Genesis 1. And then he also talks about, matter being created and then things being formed out of it and then things filling it. So and I talked about historical accounts sometimes do this dischronology or And it's an interesting thing. My wife and I are reading through, we're in 1st and 2nd Samuel. We're reading through 2nd Samuel now. We try to read every night together. But what I've noticed is sometimes it'll say like, David had these sons, and that hasn't happened yet. It's like a summary statement of what's going to happen or something. And so it seems out of order because it says David has these sons, and then it talks about him having the sons like later on. And it doesn't seem like I'm thinking, well, why is that even put in there? Why wouldn't it be put after he has the sons? And I honestly don't know. As a biblical scholar, I'm looking at it thinking, there doesn't seem to be any reason other than he's just preparing you for what's going to happen or preparing you for what's to come or something. It just seems out of order. It's not. It's in a historical narrative, so it's not in a prophecy. Like it's not. Oh, you're saying in prophecy that happens. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just saying it happens also in historical accounts, in historical books. It doesn't just happen in prophecy. It happens, and it's just the function of the way the Hebrews did history. History didn't have to be chronological. We see it in the Gospels as well. If you compare the Gospels, there seems to be, for different purposes, the Gospel writers have things in different orders for different purposes. Matthew tends to clump the parables of Jesus all together, whereas the other Gospels put them in. Luke is probably the most historically sequential. He's trying to be a historian. The other Gospels, there's thematic or for a purpose. Yeah, that's right. They did. And so it's not out of order to say, well, these aren't sequentially the same. Well, that's not the way the Hebrews didn't think in terms of sequential. They just thought in terms of there was other things that made sense to them in narratives. So it wasn't necessarily. We are so conditioned to history having to be this chronological sequence, and they were not like that. For the Hebrew mind, it didn't need to be chronological sequence. It had to be what made sense in light of what's happening, not. That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. You read the lives of the emperors. You live really any of the Greek or history or Roman history, and it's got non-sequential. It's non-sequential. It's thematic a lot of times. Yeah. So this wouldn't have bothered the Hebrews like it bothers us, right? That's my point. This is just the way. They might have thought this way. They might have thought in terms of course, it's going to be a framework, or it's, yeah. So this is topical forming and filling. I give you a handout that gives you sort of each day as in terms of tohu wabohu, or tohu. The wa at the beginning of bohu is a prefix. It just means and. So formless and void. Tohu wa bohu. And so tohu and bohu are the two columns. Tohu is forming, bohu is filling, and it gives you the 3 days and how they're formed and filled. If you look, it does seem to be, there's some beautiful symmetry there. Doesn't necessarily mean it's non-literal, but a lot of people who hold to the framework view will read it as non-literal because they think, well, if this is the case, it doesn't need to be literal. But I think you could hold it as literal and a beautiful framework as well. It could be. So, fiat, a command. So just like a kingly command is a fiat. A king will give a kingly or royal fiat, and it will be an order that must be followed. So they let there be, or let us make, or this is the fiat. What's that? Authority, that's right. Yeah, a king or someone with authority. Yeah, that's right. Okay. And I mean, we looked, you can look at these passages, but you see the temporal recapitulation in Genesis, in several passages in Genesis, and dischronologization in Matthew and Luke, for instance. I'm just giving you other examples, other biblical examples of that. As we said, that the problem creation is formless and void. The solution, creation needs to be formed and needs to be filled. And so you get that. We've mentioned that already. And I think in the handout you have, this is obviously the handout elaborates a lot more than this because it includes the picture frames, right? The let there be, and there was morning, or there was evening and there was morning, day one, day two, those types of things. So you see the light and then the lights. So the forming, there's a place now for lights to be. And now there's the lights. That's the one that doesn't quite fit quite as well because you have the sky in day two, and then you have the lights in the sky in day 4. And then you have skies and waters. So you have birds and fish, because that's what fills the skies and what fills the water. You have dry land and vegetation. Then you have land animals and humans. And it also says that he gave every green plant for them to eat. So there's the vegetation as well. Yeah. All right. That's pretty clear, right? And the handout probably helps a lot too. Okay, one more thing is, they see 7 is a symbolic number of completion and perfection. I can't overemphasize how much numbers meant to the Hebrews. There were numbers that were important for everything, and when you mention a number, they would know almost what you were about to talk about because the numbers were so. 4 is the number of the earth, 10 is the number of the nations, 12 is the number of Israel, 7 is the number of completion, 6 is the number of humans. You could go on and on. The numbers, if I said something about 6, you'd immediately start to think about human beings. Somehow I'm going to talk about a person. So in Revelation, right? What's the number? 666 is the number of a man. That's the number of man. That's literally the number of man is 6. So it just makes sense. And 10, the number of nations, the table of nations, the number of nations. 12, obviously the number of Israel. So we have 12 apostles. Makes sense. So that's 7's as significant for Israel. So there's a lot of periods of time that we think are rounded into 7's. So for instance, one of the I think it's in I'm trying to remember where it is, but it talks about the Babylonian exile being for 70 years, even though it was probably 50 years or 55 or so years. I mean, I guess if you stretch it out to the last return from the first deportation, it could be 70 years. But the reason why it was 70 years is because there were 490 years where they had not kept the sabbatical year and let the land rest. And so the idea was the land needed to rest for the 70 years they hadn't let it rest when they lived in it for 490 years. So there was 70 years during the Babylonian exile that there was rest in the land. So this is all built on 7's, right? So the sabbatical year was a thing. The year of Jubilee was after the 7th 7. That is after the 49th year. The year of Jubilee is on the 50th year. So it's on the 7th 7. Like these were so important to Israel. Now, one could argue that they were important because God created in 7 days. Or you could say, well, of course, if Moses is writing this and 7 days is already a thing, then he would write it in 7 days. You could make maybe the argument either way, but 7 was significant. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 12's number of Israel. Church is the new Israel. So of course, there's 12 disciples, right? 12 new fathers of. 12. Okay, so Christ Community is following this. Great. Yeah. So 11. Oh, was there a Judas? Was there a Judas? No. They gotta choose a new one after Judas, right? That's Acts chapter 1. So the kings and kingdoms. So we have the kings and. So you have the kingdoms, that is the spaces, and then you have the kings, that is the things that fill them, the greater and lesser light to what? To govern the day and to govern the night. The skies and the birds and the fish are now to be fruitful and multiply. And then human beings and beasts and human beings particularly are the kings of the kingdom, if you will, that is wearing the image of God. So they bring that in as well. And of course, the 7th, that is the most perfect, is God. There's eight work days, 8 works in 7 days. And so they take this as more proof that this is like, why would there be 8? Well, in 6 days, actually. Why would there be 8 works in 6 days? Why wouldn't there be 6 works in 6 days? It doesn't seem like it adds up. So that's why they'd say this is more proof for the framework view. You have themes of vegetation on day 3 and mankind on day 6, which lead to chapter 2. And so chapter 2 is about human beings and vegetation, and that's the final form and filling, or the final place and what inhabits it, is then taken into chapter 2, and that's what you get in chapter 2. You have a focus in on days 3 and 6, the forming and filling in days 3 and 6. And so they see that chapter 2 as proof that this is also a framework, because of the forming and filling that's now happens in chapter 2, that is just a reflection of days 3 and 6 merged together, put together. There is an alleged chiastic structure in days 2 through 5. I'm out of time now, but I don't see it personally. I've looked at the Hebrew over and over, and there's scholars who think that it's there, but it's a real stretch. I don't see it. So I can't explain it to you, because I would probably not do a good job of it. Yeah, so that's basically the framework view. And I'll end there, and I don't have time for questions, but if you want to talk to me after class, I guess you could. Were there questions online? I didn't, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we would run out of time. So if Andy wants to share some things, he can take his own time to do that. Right?
Next week, we're going to science. And I'll be talking about the nature of science in general. Then Andy's going to do the definition of life and the origin of life. And then I'll go into the origin of the universe, origin of the Earth and solar system. And so we're going to get into the science now, but we've got a good solid biblical background framework to work from.
Yeah. I hope I've set that up for y'all. So look, next week, if you didn't hear the beginning of that, next week, Lloyd will be talking about the nature of science, and then followed by Andy, who will talk about creation of life, creation of human beings. So the origin of life, the origin of human beings from a scientific perspective. So there's only one other class, I think, that's going to be maybe theological in nature when we talk about Adam and Eve, but yeah. So most of this will be science in terms of how do we square, or what does science say, and how do we possibly square that with Genesis 1 and 2? Okay, thanks.
Yeah.